Thanks
Welcome
for
to
having
our
me.
programming.
Welcome.
That's really funny.
Our first question was just about your thoughts on the show, that it's all about these age-old masterpieces and kind of bringing them into a more contemporary light. So what do you think society's fascination with appropriation is? How do you utilize it, and how does it appeal to you?
I remember when I first started painting, I loved Andy Warhol, and I had no background or education in fine art. And I used to think to myself, do artists really like see through a really particular filter? Like in their head, is there like a movie going with like the world looking like their paintings, you know? And I was always fascinated with the idea of a filter, you know? And when I was trying to understand art even more, I really fell in love with the Renaissance era because they were more multifaceted in their approach to living life. And I always wanted to be able to paint these compositions in my filter, but it wasn't until the last few years that the process even got to a position where it was able to handle something like a Renaissance piece. As far as my relationship to them is concerned, I think that people seem to think that we are in this vacuum of history. Like we just exist right now in this moment and nothing really came before us. And one of the things that's so interesting about the Renaissance was really just how much thought was put into like all of these artistic pieces, whether it be the Bronzino piece that's in the gallery right now in New York. I mean, Bronzino was a poet. And if you look at like the composition of this painting, and I tried to not really change anything because once I learned about the painting, I was like, oh, wow, like there's literally an entire story going on, and every single thing in this painting has its own purpose in the broader scheme of things, which also ties to Bronzino as a painter. And I mean, that's just a very small, quick example, but I feel like I'm almost living in a shadow of these great artists, and I want to build upon the past, you know, so not to forget it in a way. We progress as a society, but I think it's important to learn from the lessons of the past in order for us to progress to the future. And the Renaissance seems like a really great place to start with that for me. I really love it.
It's, you know, it really, you can see your work, you know it's your work.
Thank you for that comment. I mean, as an artist, you know, we all want our own voice and to be able to have our work be identified with. So often it's almost expected for the artist to kind of insert himself into the middle of the piece or the paintings that he makes or she makes. And for me, I've always wanted to like not necessarily have to be present with the work. I've always wanted the work to be able to kind of stand on its own and have its own identity. And of course, I understand I'm part of the process, you know, I make it, but at the same time, these Renaissance pieces, for example, no one can picture the artist in their head. And there are very few like transcripts of really like the painter and like the things that they like to eat or what they did on a daily basis. You know, I was laying in a pool right now thinking about, I wonder if any of them just laid in a pool, like thinking about something, you know, and we don't really have that kind of information. All we have are the works that they left behind. And so to like have an identifiable piece that can stand on their own without the artist is really important.
So I think we also wanted to talk to you about your use of color and what your relationship with color is, because that's such a defining component of your work. And will you describe your process a little bit, because you have such a unique process and palette within color?
So I've made art my whole life. I was going to go to school for architecture and everything, and every piece, like every drawing or anything I had made up until I was 18 years old was always black and white. I had like this aversion to color. I think maybe because it just seemed like this entire world to get into. I don't know what it was in particular, but I remember the first time I used color, that's when like everything happened. You know, it was like this explosion. And color seemed like a really easy way of getting attention at first because people are attracted to high contrast. But as the work started to evolve, I wasn't as interested in composition as much as I was in the overall color scheme of the work, the palette, and like the emotion of it. Because on the piece behind you, for example, you have like that pink light in the corner, and you have, you know, another pink in the other corner, and your eye is being forced to move around, not necessarily just because of what's on the image, but the colors on it. It just kind of draws you in. And I really like to be able to play with that emotional aspect of it, you know, people's emotions and the way they relate to color. But then I started seeing like how almost on like a subconscious level, the color choices I was making kind of reflected how I was feeling, you know, and this seems kind of a little bit more abstract compared to like the specificity of how I make work, you know, which is kind of nice having that artisty side of it. But a lot of the times the palettes are very they're indicative of how I'm feeling at that moment, you know, and then I kind of like to feed off of other people's reactions too. I mean, I think that for me, the color choices are more like trying to relate to people in a way.
I feel very uplifted by your color palette and your lines. And for me, that's the strength of the pieces. You know, they just, and also the dimension. I feel like I can just step right into this.
Well, yeah, I mean that's kind of the night, and color can tell a story. You know, I mean, especially given the type of work that I make and the process, which lends me the ability to kind of make the paintings multiple times. What's nice is being able to see and tell different stories in the choice of colors, you know, and they could be subtle changes. And for me, that's kind of the best part, because once a painting leaves or it takes on its life and it goes somewhere else, I kind of miss it a lot, you know. And one of the things I like to do is remake those pieces, sometimes for myself or sometimes, you know, for other people. And color is an opportunity. Is an opportunity for me to experience the painting literally in a whole new light, you know, and gives it a completely different perspective, I suppose.
So, Michael, for the pieces that are going to be in the New York show, they're all kind of reimaginations of these Renaissance paintings. And how do you want people to view them? What do you want the takeaway to be when viewers see these new pieces?
I've always thought it was kind of interesting that, you know, thousands of years ago, people would look at the stars and see patterns in the stars, and it's kind of like these patterns take place over years and decades, and somehow, you know, they passed on the information and they kept passing on the information, and we as a people evolved and started seeing patterns in the skies, and then we went to space and then the moon and all these different things. And that was part of keeping the conversation going, keeping it evolving, building on what had come before us. And I would like, I think, for people to walk away seeing, you know, history maybe through a different lens, but not necessarily abandoning what the original content was, you know. And then to have that connection to an artist that lived 600 years ago. I mean, that seems really interesting. I know personally for me, when I'm working with those works and seeing the brushstrokes that were made, it's really neat, you know. It's kind of neat to walk down a street and think about all the people who had walked down that street before you, or think about what that street looked like before that building was there, or, you know, all these different things. I mean, history is fascinating, you know.
Yeah, I think that was the whole point of the show, was to be able to revisit some of these, you know, wonderful works of art and then see what each artist would put his take on it.
I love seeing the appropriation of the old. You know, I love to see that come into fashion, very much so, because it's some of the most fulfilling work that I make for me personally. There's something about the human form and contrasted against all these different things. And I mean, it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. I'll show you what the studio looks like while I'm working on stencils.
That's great.
So this is, as I'm working on it, because there's so many layers that go into these pieces, I have to separate the images into multiple different projection layers. But as I'm working, here's part of like the brick that's going to go into that like fireplace. So once I cut the stencil, I need to know exactly where that shape fell, because you don't always cut it directly on the lines. And so the only way to tell is to kind of mimic spray paint, which is great with an airbrush. So I spray through every stencil each time so I can see exactly where these pieces laid, and then that way I can cut back over them. But this particular piece ends up being something like 42
Wow.
layers.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
references on the iPad to make sure that things aren't being forgotten.
That's so cool. It's unbelievable, honestly.
And then, of course, my spray paint wall,
Yes.
projector and all that. But once I start painting, then I have the
The
wall.
infamous wall.
That was perfect. Everything we
I
wanted.
know, Michael, great job.
Woo-hoo!